your mind, your being resonates. I like to use the term recognize. You see that, let's say, this is the same thing as the other thing. And I don't know whether it's seeing, but seeing is a good word, but it isn't. I wouldn't call it visual.
No, well, it isn't exactly visual. I mean, again, to quote Philo-Judaeus on the Logos, he says that the Logos goes from a thing heard to a thing seen without ever crossing through a quantized transition point. And yet this seems impossible. It seems a logical impossibility because it is either one or the other. And yet, when you actually have the experience, you see, it is as though thought, which is heard,
that's the recognition.
The thought which is heard becomes more and more intense until finally its intensity is such that with there being no jump or glitch, you now are beholding it in a three-dimensional visual space and you command it. And this is very typical of psilocybin. Yes?
I have two questions. One, when we were talking in terms of the dialogue, I was wondering if you could kind of be more descriptive in that regard. And the other thing was as far as the effects of this type of experience, especially over, say, a prolonged period of time on the body, and the body as an energy system, and how you balance that, or how you counteract possible negative effects. Or
Okay, well, I'll take the last part first, which is about the body. I'm not an abuser. It takes me a long time to assimilate each experience, and I feel, I never have lost my respect for it. I mean, I really feel dread is one of the emotions that I always feel as I approach it, because I have no faith that my sails won't be ripped this time. I always make the metaphor, it's like sailing out onto a dark ocean in your little skiff, and, you may view the moon rising serenely over the calm black water, or something the size of a freight train may roar right through your scene and leave you clutching at an oar. And I don't know, astrology is maybe helpful in figuring out when to go and when not to go, but there needs to be a way to figure out when to go and when not to go. Now, your question about the dialogue, I mean this very literally. It speaks to you, you speak to it. It says things. I don't know how many of you have read the book that my brother and I wrote under pseudonyms called Psilocybin, the Magic Mushroom Grower's Guide. But in the introduction, there's a rap which is all about, I'm old, 50 times older than thought in your species, and I came from the stars. And well, that's verbatim, I just was writing it furiously. And sometimes it's very human. I mean, my approach to it is Hasidic. I rave at it. It raves at me. We argue about what it's going to cough up and what it isn't. And I say, well, look, I'm the grower. You can't hold back on me. And it says, well, but if I showed you the flying saucer for 5 minutes, you would figure out how it works. And I said, well, come through. I remember once I asked it, what was it? It has these many manifestations. Sometimes it's like Dorothy, sometimes it's like a very Talmudic sort of pawnbroker. And I asked it one time, what are you doing on Earth? And it said, well, you're a mushroom, you live cheap. It's very... This was a quiet neighborhood till the monkeys got out of control. Yes.
Some clarification on some of the things you said. I can understand, at least in my own way, how this idea about overconsciousness or casting a shadow and that our psychedelic experience or dream experience has to do with getting in touch with that. But you said that I'm not really positive about this. This is why I need some clarification. Is that in some sense that those brief experiences, that something about that our experience was in order to get back there, and that was the reason for us to be?
Let me see. Well, I think that this object, as a friend of mine said, history is the shockwave of eschatology. In other words, we are living in a very unique moment, 10 or 20,000 years long, where this immense transition is happening. And the object at the end of and beyond history, which is the human species transformed into this eternal superconducting overmind spacecraft thing, is casting a shadow back through time. And all religion, all philosophy, all wars, pogroms, persecutions are because people do not get the message right. And that's because there is both the forward-flowing casuistry of being, causal determinism, and the interference pattern that is formed against that by the backward-flowing fact of this eschatological hyper-object throwing its shadow across the landscape. So we exist, there is a great deal of noise. This situation called history is totally unique. It will only last for a moment. It began a moment ago, it will only last for a moment. But in that moment, there is like this tremendous burst of static as the monkey goes to godhood, and there is this crossing of I don't like to call it the casuistry, but the efficacy of the eschaton, this final eschatological object, and the forward flow of entropic circumstance. Does that get it for you? Maybe.
Well, I have a little bit of trouble thinking kind of like which came first. Are you saying the chicken or the egg? Are you saying that this overconsciousness has something to do with
Well, I'm certainly saying that life is necessary. That life is it is not the idea that we have been skewed onto a siding called organic existence and that our actual place is in eternity. No, there is something about this is a very important part of the cycle. It is a filter. Remember, I mentioned that I thought that there was the possibility of extinction. There was the possibility of falling into physis forever. And so in that sense, the metaphor of the fall is valid. There is a spiritual obligation. There is a task to be done. It isn't, though, simply something as simple-minded as following a set of somebody else's rules. It's that the noetic enterprise is a primary obligation of being in this circumstance. And your salvation is linked to it. Because if you do, and not everyone has to read alchemical texts or study superconducting biochemistry to make the transition. Most people make it naively by thinking clearly about the present at hand. But we are intellectuals trapped in a world of too much information. Innocence is gone for us. We cannot expect to cross the rainbow bridge through the act of a good act of contrition. That won't be sufficient. We have to understand, and I recall, Whitehead said, understanding is the apperception of pattern as such, because to fear death is to not understand what's going on. And to even see it as a big deal is to not understand what's going on, although I don't claim to have reached that exalted plane. But cognitive activity is the defining fact of humanness. Language, thought, analysis, art, poetry, myth-making, these are the things that point the way toward the realm of being of the eschaton. That is what Joyce means when he says man may become dirigible. In other words, man may be released into a realm of pure engineering. The imagination is everything. This was Blake's perception. This is where we come from. This is where we're going. And it is only to be approached through cognitive activity, I think.
Can you comment on the importance of your discussion of the I Ching in your book?
Well, very briefly, because I always have the feeling this part bores people more than any other because it hinges on tiny details. But briefly, what the Logos said to me was that time is not simply a homogeneous medium where things occur. You can think of it as a fluctuating density of probability, so that though science will tell us what can happen and what cannot happen, we have no theory that explains why out of everything that could happen, certain things undergo what Whitehead called the formality of actually occurring. And this was what the Logos sought to explain to me. Why out of all the myriad things that could happen, certain things undergo the formality of occurring. And it is because there is a modular hierarchy of waves of temporal conditioning or temporal density, or in other words, a given moment, it is more likely for a certain event rated highly improbable. It is more probable at some moments than others. And taking that simple perception and being led by the hand, by the Logos, we were able to construe maps of time, which we run on a computer, and which give a map of the ingression of what I call novelty, the ingression of novelty into time. Now, as a general statement, it's obvious that novelty generally is increasing. It has been since the very beginning of the universe, because first there was only the possibility of nuclear interaction, and then as temperatures fell and below the bond strength of the nucleus, atomic systems could be formed, and then as temperature fell, molecular systems could be formed. Then much later, life became possible, and then as very high life forms, complex life forms evolved, thought became possible, culture was invented, and then with the invention of printing and language, and then printing, and then electronic information movement and this kind of thing, what is happening is there is an ingression of novelty toward what Whitehead, and I took his term, call concrescence. And this is a tightening gyre. Everything is flowing together. And in fact, the man-made lapis, the alchemical stone at the end of time, occurs when everything flows together, when the laws of physics are obviated, and the universe disappears, and what is left is the tightly bound plenum, the monad, if you wish, able to express itself for itself, rather than able only to cast a shadow into physis as its reflection. And I come very close here to classical millenarian and apocalyptarian thought. My view of the rate at which change is accelerating and the way the gyre is tightening causes me to think, and the wave predicts this, that it is not long, it is soon. 50 years, 25 years, 35 years, then this event will occur. It is the entry of the species into hyperspace, but it will appear to be the collapse of the state vector and the end of physical laws and the release of the mind into itself. And all these other images, the starship, the space colony, all that, these are precursors. Again, the idea that history is the shockwave of eschatology. As you close distance with the eschatological object, the reflections it is throwing off become more and more true to the thing itself. And in the final moment, God stands revealed. There are no more reflections of the mystery. The mystery in all its nakedness then is seen, and nothing else exists. But what this is, decency can safely scarcely hint at.
Now's the time to buy during Raymond Chevrolet's Let's Trade Keys event. You could pay the same or less than what you're paying now. With over 1,000 vehicles to choose from, it's easy to find your new vehicle at Raymond Chevrolet. Stop by today and let's trade keys. Consistent, affordable, reliable, expert. It's who we are and what we do. At Raymond Chevrolet, we care. Visit us on Route 173 in Antioch or RaymondChevrolet.com.
Obviously, when you evolve inside an animal body, localized in space and time, you get a hellacious set of reflexes and muscles designed to deal with immediate threat in the environment. But at the core of the oyster is, this portal into universalism, which we have denigrated to what we call the imagination. There is a third eye. The third eye exists, but it doesn't look out at this world. You've got two perfectly good eyes for doing that. The third eye looks out at the holographic matrix of informational totality. And then the problem for that form of perception is filtering.
Say it in another word.
Well, Atman means soul or being. Yes, it's simply that consciousness is distributed and holographic, and nobody has their brand on it. What we have been calling human consciousness is the only consciousness there is. It's something you tap into, not something you evolve out of yourself. You required a local language to create a local model of this universal input. If your local language is insufficient, then you abide in a domain of intuition, and that's what I would call animal consciousness. It's a domain of intuition of being. Animals intuit being, but given a more advanced nervous system, a more advanced cultural toolkit, the intuition changes into a direct perception, and you begin to make poetry and experience loss and feel love and you begin to feel the emotional outlines of the enterprise of being and how far one can go into that. I assume it's infinite, or at least appears infinite from our limited position.
So the local languages?
Well, the local language is a necessary compromise. It's interesting. The thing that makes psychedelics so central to a discussion like this is they are the only thing which pulls the plug on the illusion created by local language. That's why people are both in love with it and terrified of it, because it addresses a fundamental aspect of reality, and it addresses it incontrovertibly. And people who feel culture as a safety zone that is keeping at bay the black oceans of God knows what are not interested in taking psychedelics. On the other hand, people who feel confined by the cultural dream and who want to cross the black oceans of who knows what to see what's on the other side, they embrace that same experience as a God-sent gift. But it's the same phenomenon. So it addresses, one's own fundamental relationship to the unknown. Local languages, like local cultures and architectural styles and everything else, are designed to create, I think, an infantile sense of security. One of the bees of my rear end these days is the idea that culture is not our friend, that we have been very naive about what culture is and how it is something designed for the convenience of the species. And, it could turn you into a janitor or a banker or a celebrity or anything else with no interest or concern for whether that's good for you. It plays with individuals, and most people think, or at least I think most people think, that when you get to be, 30, 35, 40 or something, you have jumped all the hurdles. You got your college degree, you had some children, you made some money, lost some money, maybe you had a marriage, maybe you had several, and anyway, people sort of get the feeling, well, I've done it. Actually, the major adventure still lies ahead, and the major adventure is to claim your authentic, true being, which is not culturally given to. The culture will not explain to you how to be a real human being. It will tell you how to be banker, politician, Indian chief, masseuse, actress, whatever, but it will not give you human being, and maybe this is the voice of somebody who just turned 50 talking, but I thought it would get simpler. It doesn't, because this rejection of culture thing is the last and hardest step to take, and there are all kinds of impediments to taking it. The fact that in middle age, if you've played the game right, you get a lot of money. That's totally stultifying in most cases in terms of going forward to the next level. It's almost as though culture is an enterprise self-organized to buy you off at the moment when you might be most dangerous to its values and goals. Well, in Revelation, the Ancient of Days is described as there's a sword which comes out of the mouth. It's a very hard image to picture, but a sword, a turning sword, which comes out of the mouth. And of course, the whole Western myth of creation is that the world was made by an utterance. In principio et verbum et verbo caro factum est. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was made flesh. And in some sense, I think the what is not stated there is that then out of the flesh, the Word must be redistilled. That's the second half of the historical process. In this book, which I may mention, the point that the statement is made that God created man in order to taste the bitter fruit of time. In the DMT flash, the entities that appear, their entire program is a program of language acquisition. And, this is a point that's brushed over in science fiction films because it's actually such a conundrum. Those of you who saw and who suffered, as I did, Mars Attacks, the little role for Rod Steiger in there as the German guy with the translation machine. Well, if you think about alien contact, real alien contact, we cannot assume that universal understanding is easily achieved. The very first aspect of true alien contact would probably be a language lesson of some sort, because the aliens don't want to communicate about our gross national product or our political system. If they do, they're not really aliens. They're just odd-looking people from far away. Real aliens have something really alien to communicate, and it can only be communicated in an alien language.
Has America passed the point of no return? Have we fallen too far to recover? It's true that we've had spiritual revivals and great awakenings in the past, but have we ever sunk this low? We're talking about more than 60 million abortions since 1973, about a radical redefinition of marriage and an all-out assault on gender distinctions, about a widespread scorning of the Bible and biblical values, about an epidemic of pornography, about massive spiritual and moral decline to the point that middle school children are sexting each other, meaning sending each other naked pictures. And we're talking about tremendous division on every front, political, and social, and ethnic. How do we recover from this? Could it be too late for America? Based on the lessons of history, the answer is absolutely not. Another great awakening could be at hand. And we can learn something here from the modern history of England. It's very easy, of course, to remember Britain's Christian history. We remember the Puritans in the 1600s, and George Whitefield and John Wesley in the 1700s, and William Booth and Charles Spurgeon in the 1800s, and G.K. Chesterton and C.S. Lewis in the 1900s. But there have been massive ebbs and flows in England's spiritual history as well, with periods of real religious darkness. Apologist and author Alex McFarland notes that Sir William Blackstone, who lived from 1723 to 1780, visited all of the major churches in London to hear sermons. Of all that he heard, There's no more gospel in their sermons than in the writings of Cicero. One cannot tell by their statements whether they're followers of Confucius, Mohammed, or Christ. McFarlane also notes that one historian described England as one vast casino. Newborns were exposed in the streets. 97% of the infant poor were sold into the workhouses and died as children. Bear baiting and cockfighting were accepted sports, and tickets were sold to public executions as to a theater. The slave trade brought material gain to many while further degrading their souls. In fact, Irish Bishop George Berkeley, who lived from 1685 to 1753, wrote that morality and religion in Britain had collapsed to a degree that was never known in any Christian country. Yet it was against this backdrop that the Methodist awakening began, sparked by Whitefield and led by Wesley. And by the end of the century, the nation was transformed. Not long after, slave trade was abolished in England and the entire British Empire. It was not too late for England. Professor Elie Halevi, 1870 to 1937, a prominent French historian and philosopher, claimed that it would be difficult to overestimate the part played by the Wesleyan revival in transforming England. He actually called it the moral cement of the society, and he stated that the revival explained the miracle of modern England. In fact, in 1922, British Prime Minister Lloyd George said that the Wesleyan revival was responsible for a complete revolution affected in the whole country.
Shut up.
That gives me hope for America. Our nation has also had its spiritual ups and downs. Where is it written that there will not be another, even greater awakening? During the days of the colonies in the 1720s, Reverend Samuel Blair stated, "Religion lay as it were dying, ready to expire its last breath of life in this part of the visible church." And remember, this was a very Christian time in our history, yet still it was backsliding. But a few years later, the First Great Awakening hit, led by the great philosopher and theologian Jonathan Edwards, and the colonies were changed. About 70 years later, it's reported that Supreme Court Chief Justice John Marshall commented that the church is too far gone ever to be redeemed. These observations were quickly swept away by the Supreme Court. Things have been dark, yet God has moved. More recently, April 8th, 1966, Time magazine featured a stark front cover asking in bold text, "Is God dead?" 5 years later, June 21st, 1971, the Time cover story featured a picture of a hippie like Jesus with the caption, "The Jesus Revolution." So this coming. In that same spirit, G.K. Chesterton wrote, "At least 5 times the faith has to all appearances gone to the dogs. In each of these 5 cases, it was the dog that died." But there's another lesson we can learn from history. Revival comes when the church gets desperate. Revival comes when the people of God stop their normal routines and pray and fast and cry out. God fills the hungry, not the self-satisfied and complacent. And that means that the real question for us is not, is it too late in America? But rather, are we desperate enough for revival? It's a question only you and I can answer.
So I think it's very suggestive that these invisible entities that we contact, the local language boundary and not what you think it is. Mathematics is basically rational thinking about defined sets of entities. And since the imagination is nothing but defined sets of entities, the rules which govern them are worth learning. In practical terms, what it comes down to is logic. And one of the big problems that haunts the current cultural impasse is the fact that there's a lot of hostility to science. And it has spilled over, and science we should be very suspicious of. It's a wonder for a magician dealing its wares in the market. So we should be suspicious of science. But this scientific paranoia has spilled over into a suspicion of reason. This is too much. If you abandon reason, you will have nothing to guide you but the emotional depth of the situation. This is what I call the depth of the call. And in the 20th century, the history of following the depth of the call has not been a happy one. We cannot trust the call of the blood uncritiqued by reason is primary in this situation. Well, so then many people say, well, mathematics is possible, logic is difficult. Isn't there a third possibility? Isn't there yet another way to get an answer? The answer is yes, but I'm not sure it's seen at first. But that is aesthetic. The imagination must serve the ideal of the people. I talked about this a little bit last night. That which is tasty is to be avoided at all costs. And 90% of the difficulty in your intellectual life would never have happened if it just had better taste. Am I not right? You know, I look at this heaven's gate thing in amazement because of its taste. That's all. I mean, it is utterly unappealing for that reason. I don't even have to reach for the club of logic. If it had been better scripted, I might need logic. But the aesthetics of the situation are just so overwhelmingly, that the suicide cult that eliminated itself in San Diego. Yeah. Well, usually, I mean, people ask me what will happen in 2012, and I say, it's like asking a man facing east at 2 a.m., what will sunrise look like? In other words, it's too early to ask. Well, I think that, I don't have an answer to the problem of the bully and the slave, unless, as the Marxists claim, that is inimical to disparity of wealth. Because I think disparity of wealth is a transient phenomenon based on a limited technology. But it is entirely possible that we can make everyone a king, and we will still have bullies and slaves. So if the Marxists are wrong, and the addressing of the economic disparity doesn't change the structure of the human soul, then we will have to go deeper. And I don't know how this is going to look. There's a lot of tension in any community that discusses this kind of stuff over where the body lies in all of this. Can we solve our problems and maintain our individual existence? Or are we in fact seriously building a level of hierarchical control above the level of the individual that will make things like states and corporations like tails? Are we in fact trying to create a super organism? What is the relationship of an idea like that in plastic practice? Well, what about this? I mean, is it the coming of the superorganism? It is constituted on an incredible scale. It is going to redefine what it is to be human. I think technologies are neither gods nor demons. It's what you do with it. The dilemma of human freedom is that we don't know where we rest in the universal hierarchy of good and evil. In other words, what would we do if we could do anything? Would our transcendent impulses drive us to a kind of angelhood? Or, as James Joyce says, would we flop on the stuff? And the answer normally given is some will do one and some the other. Yes, but what if we erase that possibility of individual action? And is there then only one destiny? And then what shall it be? And who shall decide? I would be fairly pessimistic if I saw this all going on a level playing field. But it isn't going on a level playing field. Transcendence is sacred. Nature seems to be in the business of building systems which transcend themselves. And we can see that as far back in time as we care to look throughout all of nature. So it seems like we actually have a hell of a taste helping us towards the
Let's Trade Keys event. You could pay the same or less than what you're paying now. With over 1,000 vehicles to choose from, it's easy to find your new vehicle at Raymond Chevrolet. Stop by today and let's trade keys. Consistent, affordable, reliable, expert. It's who we are and what we do. At Raymond Chevrolet, we care. Visit us on Route 173 in Antioch or RaymondChevrolet.com.
In a sense, more, because this is, we have become the very thing our parents warned us against. We see those cheerful dreams of endless progressivism that built up the 19th century and early 20th century have given way to a much more cynical and sophisticated understanding that our buildings may become taller, our automobiles shinier, but somehow the human animal is not moving forward at the same rate as our technology. So what we have to do then is just swap it and let the devil take the hindmost. At least create a world where those who aspire to same things are not blocked to the aspiration. And of course it's not that some of us are who are aspirants and others the haunters of the sleepy side of the internet. We each play all these roles and move according to taste. I mean, one of the great falsities of print is making illegitimate schizophrenia. I mean, we are all just a swarm of personalities. The idea that a healthy person has a unified identity is a silly idea. It's like believing that sexual preference comes in only two flavors. It's one of those incredibly weird simplifications that once made, like, no matter how much agony it causes it. So last night what I said was that I was a Platonist, and that Plato suggested that the world would approach through three paths: the good, the true, and the beautiful. But that goodness is controversial, and truth difficult to discern, but that beauty has a kind of resonant self-evidence. And so, following beauty, my faith will lead to the good and the true. And some beauty is, I'm a fan of extreme forms of beauty. Hieronymus Bosch and Redon and James Ensor. The beautiful can be grotesque. Of course, this then opens up a whole aesthetic can of worms that maybe we don't want to get into. Well, beautiful art is never bad. Yes, I think the beauty of the grotesque is a modern contribution to the discussion of beauty. And it's a higher form of perception. It's all very fine to find beauty in wildflowers and women dancing diaphanous dresses and harpsichord music. And it's quite another to find beauty in ripped up railway tickets and found objects and smashed machinery and that sort of thing. The modern sensibility has been unsentimental and has, in that sense, advanced the canon of beauty. Modernity, I'm feeling much better about now that it's over. It's such a huge enterprise to look back on. What faith, what simplicity, what naivete those people possess. I can hardly get over it. The 20th century, for all of its brutality and its flirtation with the dark side of the soul, the counterpoint is incredible optimism and idealism, and its simplicity.
Why are you such a pussy?
Fascism, the simplicity of Marxism,
Tell me.
the simplicity of democracy.
Tell me why.
These are ideologies that clearly never met a human being. Yeah. Well, the idea of an attractor, you see, huge thought structures that we live inside that we're not even aware of. And one of them is the idea that causes precede their effect.
Fucking weakling. Fucking weakling. You're not like me. You're not strong.